Well, hello there, ladies and gents. Good to see you again, and welcome back to Closing Arguments. I'm Ryan Ruff, your moderator, but as always, I'll be joined by John or Jack Razumich, as many know him by, from Razumich and Associates, and we're going to be jumping into another criminal law-related discussion here on the podcast. And for those of you that have been joining us lately, we've been doing a real deep dive into the criminal proceedings in the court case of, the state of Indiana versus Richard Allen. In fact, 4 parts, 4 episodes covering that specific court case, but we're getting back to your regularly scheduled programming, if you will, as we await new developments in that case, which, as we mentioned in our last episode, we'll be sure to circle back and update you guys, our audience, in the event that any updates do come to light. But for now, back to regularly scheduled programming, and Jack and I thought it'd be a fun one today to dive into the life of Jack, if you will, the True Attorney Confessions, really the title of today's episode. Before we really get into it, let's go ahead and say hi to the man of the hour. Jack, it's great to see you today. How you doing?
Hey, Ryan. Great to be back as always. We have sun. The birds are singing. We have warm weather. It's great. This is great. And as you mentioned a few moments ago, after 4 weeks of really involved discussion and commentary over a horrific murder that has captivated international attention, it seemed like a fun thing to do, to go back to something light, like complaining about the life of an attorney, because clearly that's what everyone who listens to us and watches us wants to hear about, is how bad it is being an attorney. But
look, folks, I mean, yes, we're going to take a peek behind the curtain, if you will, into Jack's life, but mainly this is going to be beneficial for you. We're going to be talking about some of the key questions, key thoughts and considerations that, Jack, I know your clients pepper you with questions about as they hire you and Razumich and Associates for your services. But in addition to that, just enlightening information for anybody that may find themselves in a situation where they do need to hire a criminal defense attorney. So, Jack, why don't let's kind of start high level, before we get too deep into the weeds of everything. Talk me through why there just might be so many myths or misunderstandings about defense attorneys in general, but then also, why don't you start getting into really the realities that is hiring a defense attorney?
I think that part of the reason why there are a lot of myths about what defense attorneys do is because we don't make good copy for Hollywood. and I'm not kidding on that. If you were to really think about all the various police dramas or procedural shows that are out there, and some of them are really good. Like I love Dragnet. I grew up watching Dragnet, and Law and Order has been on TV almost quite as long as I've been alive. I think I do beat Law and Order, but there are plenty of people in the audience that do not. So all these shows, though, overwhelmingly show the prosecution as the good guys or the police as the good guys. And I'm not saying that they're not good prosecutors and police officers out there, but from a public relations standpoint, we've got Perry Mason and Matlock. And Perry Mason hasn't been on television for, I think that series ended in the 60s. They did a series of TV movies in the 80s. And Matlock was in the 80s. So we've got a good 30 plus years of not good representation of defense attorneys on television. And before someone goes into the comments, yes, I know HBO has what they're claiming to be a Perry Mason television series. It's not Perry Mason. That's a separate issue that someone else who does pop culture can talk about, but that's not Perry Mason. So as a result, we don't get a lot of media portrayal. To the extent that we do get media portrayal, it's usually in comedy shows like Ally McBeal or Boston Legal, both of which are great television shows, by the way. I'm not saying anything bad about either of those. But I assure you, I have never had a defense case that involved baking an omelet in court as part of getting out of a murder charge. If anything like that happened, I'd probably retire, because I don't know what else there would be for me to do at that point.
Sure.
So yeah, we don't get the same degree of coverage that the state does. And as a result, there's a lot of confusion regarding what is involved in hiring an attorney. And when we do get representation, like there's the concept of the defense attorney is a shyster. The defense attorney is the guy who's going to pull like the fast one over the state's eyes. And to answer your question about the reality of hiring a defense attorney, you're hiring a defense attorney to provide you with a professional evaluation and a professional breakdown of what your options are. What we're not is magicians. And that is increasingly in the modern world, given a lot of the economic realities that we're facing, time of recording, money is tight for everybody, and hiring your own private defense attorney is admittedly a luxury service. The state literally gives away what I do for free. I am competing with the United States government, mostly the state of Indiana government, but the same general concept. So when people hire me or when they hire another private attorney, I think that there is sometimes this misapprehension or this misbelief or misunderstanding, however you want to phrase it, that we have magic wands as private defense attorneys. And that's not true. We have more time to give attention to your case, and that can get you better results. A good example that we've got is we had a case. We had a dealing case, a dealing in narcotics case, and there was a lot of question regarding what the material was in it that was recovered. It was a synthetic drug of some kind. The state police labs were claiming it was one type of remarkably complicated synthetic narcotic. We were arguing that it was a synthetic cannabinoid, basically synthetic marijuana, well, in one of the spice mixtures. What we were able to do is we were able to have that evidence tested by our own chosen experts who provided a completely different breakdown as to what the material was. That saved the client from being convicted of possession of a narcotic, and it was turned into possession of a synthetic marijuana. It was a lower level controlled substance concept. He still got convicted. Now you can make an argument that, yeah, we used our magic private attorney powers to make the case go away and have a better result for it. But what he got for hiring us was he got our time and attention. And sometimes, no matter how much time or attention that we give to a case, you're in too deep of a hole for us to get you out of. A lot of higher level assault cases are great examples of this. If based off of what the evidence is, what we're able to do for you is we are able to use our experience. We're able to use our leverage our reputation in a lot of ways. If you go in there and you have an attorney that the prosecution knows isn't going to basically drool on themselves at trial, that's a good thing for you. That is, you are sometimes hiring a reputation when you're hiring a private attorney, but the clients do still get convicted. And that is something that we have to come to grips with sometimes when we're having these discussions with our clients is they get this idea that I've paid you this much money. Why won't this go away? Do you need me to pay you more money? If you pay me more money, will the problem go away? I assure anyone who's listening to this or watching this, if you paying me more money magically made your case go away, I would tell you up front, because I will happily be paid more money to make your problem go away. But we're not genies.
Right.
That's all there is to it. It's like, we're not, we can't fix everything. And a lot of people, I think, do fall into that sunk cost fallacy where they think, well, I've paid this much.
Yeah.
I need to get something out of it. What you get out of the end of it is you get a very clear understanding as to what the evidence was against you, what your options were at defense, what we thought of those options. And you do often get a result that is slightly better than what would be with a public defender. But that, again, is a concept of time. It's not a guarantee that your charges disappear or that you're not going to be convicted, or worse, in a lot of cases, that you won't go to prison, because that does still happen.
Yeah. Well, Jack, you make an interesting point. I mean, yes, you know the playbook, and they're paying for your expertise, your reputation a little bit, for you to leverage the skills, the playbook, the years of practice and studying and knowledge to pass the bar, to do all the things, and they're tapping into that. But as you mentioned, it doesn't always yield the positive not guilty verdict. And along that line, a lot of the times, obviously, as our audience is aware of, there's the talk of plea agreements that enter the play. the field of play, if you will. So talk to me about some of the realities of a plea agreement. I know this is probably a hot button issue. A lot of folks ask you questions about, regularly. And as a defense attorney, I would imagine in those instances where the deck or the factual evidence seems to be stacked against your client, and it looks like they are in fact guilty, well, negotiating and leveraging a favorable plea agreement is probably a great solution for them in that moment. Talk to me about the realities of plea agreement from your side of the coin, if you will.
Statistically speaking, something in the area of around, I want to say the national average, something like 97% of all cases resolved by plea agreement. And what a plea agreement is kind of a bit of a broad term. When you're charged with a crime, one of three things happens. Either the state dismisses it for one reason or another. Either they have problems with their witnesses, or there's some sort of suppression issue that comes up, which I guess technically would be part of a problem with the evidence. The second way that a case resolves is by actually going to trial. You have a constitutional right under both the federal constitution and every state constitution to a trial. That is archaically the way that cases would be resolved. You go to trial, you either win or lose a trial. The third way, which was largely a development over the later 19th and certainly throughout the 20th century, was that you reach some sort of pretrial agreement with the prosecution to resolve the case without proceeding to trial. That can be a deferred prosecution. It can be a no contest plea. It can be an agreement to plead guilty to something. So it all gets lumped into that category of guilty plea. Most cases resolved by guilty plea for a variety of different reasons. The first and foremost is the penalties for criminal offenses skyrocket very quickly. In Indiana, for example, we have two very similar statutes. We have residential entry, which is a level 6 felony. It involves basically breaking and entering into the dwelling of another. And we have burglary, which is a level 4 felony, which is breaking or entering into the dwelling of another with the intent of committing a theft or a felony therein. Residential entry is a level 6 felony offense. That is a potential sentence range of 6 months up to 2.5 years imprisonment. Burglary is a level 4 felony. That carries a potential sentence of anywhere between 2 to 12 years in prison, with an advisory sentence of 6 years in prison, with a mandatory stay on the with a mandatory determination that you are a serious violent felon as a result of it. So, if you've got a situation where you're charged with burglary, and there's no question about you were caught in a house or something along those lines, like you actually got into a fight with the homeowner or something along those lines, it's probably going to be in your best interest to resolve it on a residential entry plea if you can, because the penalties are so much lesser. You can get that level 6 felony down to a misdemeanor at the end of the day. And you can't do anything with that level 4 felony offense. So that's kind of an example why a lot of these cases are resolved by plea agreement. What drives us absolutely bonkers and mad as defense attorneys is when the prosecution does not offer a quote unquote reasonable plea agreement until the last possible second. It seems, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of other defense attorneys, that a lot of the state's strategy anymore is, let's hold this as long as we can and see who blinks first. We had, we're recording this on March 12th. On March 4th, so a week ago Monday, we were scheduled to be in a jury trial. We were scheduled to be in a jury trial on a theft case. My client was accused of basically walking into a walking into a restaurant, walking behind the counter, just getting into the cash register and emptying it out and running off. It took 11 months to get this case resolved.
Wow.
It took 11 months for us to get this case resolved. We tried everything that we could to convince the state to let this go. They actually had surveillance footage in this case, and the surveillance footage looked absolutely nothing like the defendant. I want to be very clear on this. the person who was in the security footage was tall, lean, appeared to be African American. The defendant, who they arrested and charged with this offense, was short, kind of roundish, and about as white as alabaster. But the state did not care. We did depositions of all the state's witnesses. We did our job as defense attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And
were they out on bail, Jack, or did they have to spend time behind bars during that?
No. Fortunately, we were able to get the initial warrant that was issued in this case recalled. Mm-hmm. We were able to have them released on their own recognizance. They weren't tied up. They weren't sitting in a cell for 11 months. Mm-hmm. But their life was still on hold for that year. I mean, it's very difficult to get a job or get an apartment or kind of just move on with your life. If every 45 days you have to go back to court, and anyone who looks at your background says, you're accused of theft right now, maybe come back later.
Sure.
So, we had to do everything we could to keep our clients' confidence up, because again, it's going back to the television analogy, like, this is not like television. This isn't done in 52 minutes with 8 minutes left over for commercial breaks. This is a grueling, painful marathon.
Yeah.
So the clients don't see anything that they consider to be progress, and we have to keep their spirits up, and we had to kind of keep them confident, keep them pumped, keep them motivated, because we were going to trial. We were going to a trial on this, and I kid you not, at 5:00 on the Sunday before we were supposed to be in trial, I get a call from the prosecutor who is handling the case, who told me, hey, so we're not going to be able to proceed forward at this point. We are having witness issues. We're having evidence issues. We're going to dismiss first thing in the morning. So, that story had a happy ending because there's not a conviction.
Man.
Think about the situations, though, where the issue is one of you've got a plea agreement at the end of the day. Because we have that same situation will still happen. It becomes effectively a game of chicken, because the prosecution doesn't have anything to lose. The prosecution's not the one who's facing punishment. The prosecution's not the one who has had their life put on hold with this. Mm-hmm. A similar situation, like battery offenses, a lot of times will do that. We'll have situations where we'll make what we consider to be a very reasonable plea agreement up front. I realize that prosecutors may think that we have a completely different version of what is and is not reasonable in this world. I like to pride myself on professionalism, but we'll say, okay, this is, based off of the facts of this case, we're not saying that we're not guilty of something. We would just like to resolve it this way. This seems to be the most fair way of resolving it for everybody. It saves everyone the time and trouble of the trial. Everyone moves on. And if the state says no, and we have to keep the client confidence up, we'll just go back to the burglary example, because I have had this happen in burglary cases. We're like, hey, let's not do the burglary, let's do the residential entry. The state says no. We have to keep the client's confidence up this entire time, and then to be contacted a day or two before trial and said, okay, we'll give you the residential entry plea now. That puts us as defense attorneys into a bit of a problem, because we now have to go back to a client and explain to them, this is in your best interest. This guarantees you no prison time. This guarantees you no extensive collateral consequences. And then the first question is like, well, you just told me we had a great defense at trial. That's true. I don't lie to my clients. If they have a good defense, I will tell them they have a good defense. But I also can't factor in how the 12 jurors are going to react. You don't get do-overs on jury trials. You get one shot at this, and you either win or you leave in handcuffs. Mm-hmm. So that type of reality is one of the things that we're doing when we're explaining to our clients what is and is not good, bad, or indifferent. Mm-hmm. And it's with plea agreements, as I said, it's just so hard with plea agreements when we try to get these things resolved up front, and or not even up front, like just in a reasonable amount of time. Mm-hmm. And the state drags its feet. The state plays that waiting game. The state plays chicken, hoping that we're going to break. And when the state's the one that blinks, now we have to go back and tell them, like, everything I told you before about why we should go to trial, Throw that out the
Yeah.
window. This is what we
Yeah.
really need to do with it. And
You're playing chess on a chessboard that's constantly moving, is really what it sounds like.
it is.
Yeah.
And there's a reason, there's that old joke. I don't know who said it. I'm sure someone in the comments can tell me, but that old joke about, the attorney who represents himself as a fool for a client. You need that impartiality. You need that step back. And
Mhm.
it's not that I don't care about my clients. I care about my clients quite a bit. I have a great deal of concern for their well-being. I have a great deal of professional pride in what I do. Um, but I understand from their perspective why it feels like we're playing games with them. I assure you, this is not a game to me, and it's not a game to my client. The only one that's a game for is the state. I can't even give them that credit.
Yeah.
It's very much one of those things. I think that it's either a combination of understaffed, overwork, or just outright laziness, that they're not doing anything on these cases until the last second.
Mm.
And that's
Frustrating.
what we have to deal with when we're trying to explain to these clients, this is why you don't get the plea agreement that you want, or like
Yeah.
at the last second, okay, now you get the plea agreement you want.
Yeah.
The other reality about plea agreements, and this we might have covered this in our myth episode from last year, but if we didn't, I'm going to tell you right now, you're not entitled to a plea agreement, and you are not entitled to 3 plea agreements. Somewhere along the lines, there's like some sort of prison pamphlet or something that goes around where everyone seems to think that you get 3 continuances, 3 plea agreements. Each of those plea agreements has to be better than the last one. That is false. if you're charged with murder, and 2 weeks later I come to you and say, okay, here's an aggravated battery plea, it's not getting any better than that. They're not going to come back and eventually say, okay, here's your misdemeanor battery plea. That is legitimately as good as that gets. Which again goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you're leveraging your reputation, sometimes you will get those resolutions faster.
Sure.
But that's kind of the reality of plea agreements. Like a lot of
Yeah.
the cases do resolve that way. I promise you, at least on our side, we're not jerking you around. We are trying to get this done for you in as orderly a fashion as we can.
Sure. And Jack, I mean, look, I know we spent a lot of time on this one, but for rightly so. I mean, the plea agreements is a backbone of what you're ultimately fighting for on the client's behalf. When the deck is stacked and the evidence is stacked against them in a particular manner. I want to flip the script now and turn down an interesting road, if you will. And that's this image of the defense attorney being painted as the bad guy, another bad guy representing a bad guy, So what do you say, Jack, to the concept of a defense attorney is essentially just letting guilty people get away with victimizing others and getting off the hook of that? I mean, I'm just curious, what's your take on that? I know it paints defense attorneys primarily as a bad guy helping a bad guy, but it's not the case. Talk to me about it.
What I don't think that people understand is how over-criminalized we've made so many different elements of life and society these days. I have spoken with uniform patrol officers, uniform police officers, who have told me that they're trained at the academy that if you follow a car for more than a minute and can't find a reason to pull this person over, you've done something wrong. That's the mentality that the state has with this. I always tell people that my job is not to get guilty people off. My job is to make sure the rules are followed. And the rules are remarkably available to anybody. By government edict at both the federal level and the state level, if you want to know what the law is, you can look the law up online. You can go to the library and get the law books. Understanding it is sometimes a little bit more complicated, but you can actually see what the rules are. That is your surface level rules. Did a crime happen? Based off of that, we look at procedural rules and evidentiary rules, and those are also written by the state of Indiana. The entire reality of the legal system is the government against the individual. The government wrote the rules. The government wrote they wrote the rules. So they wrote the statutes. They wrote the rules of procedure. They wrote the rules of evidence. If the state can't follow the rules that it created itself, it's very important to make sure that people are not being convicted. My job is not to make a judgment of guilt or innocence. My job is to determine were the rules followed. And a lot of times we're the only ones that seem to care about that. Let's again go back to the theft case that we were talking about a couple weeks ago. You have a very clear piece of evidence in the surveillance footage that shows someone who is very clearly not the person who is accused of a crime. If you're not willing to stare that down and say, you can't, this isn't right, this is not appropriate, you broke the rules, that's bad. Because to everyone who says that defense attorneys are just horrible, terrible scumbags who let guilty people free, it does not take much for someone to be sitting next to me in court. One bad decision, one wrong turn, one mistake, and congratulations, you're now there. One of the more heartbreaking stories that I've come across in my career, and this is one of those things that I've always really remembered, is we had a client. He was 19 when I first met him. He was accused of possession of a narcotic. He was a heroin addict. This is like very early in his addiction. So we initially started representing him. His parents hired us to represent him to defend him against that offense. We got him into treatment. We got him a drug court program. We did our job as defense attorneys. You know, we leveraged the rules that the state set out for us to use to get him the best resolution, which in his case, he got treatment. He was discharged from rehab, and the state agreed to drop his charges at that point in time. Unfortunately, as anyone who knows anything about addiction goes, it's not as easy as just saying, okay, congratulations, you've done 30 days in rehab, you're cured. He ended up falling back into his addictions, and at one point in time, he ended up getting cited. He ended up becoming homeless. Like he ran away from home. His parents lost track of him. He was living on the streets here in Indianapolis. He got cited for panhandling. This is an example of how over criminalized we make things in the world. It is an actual legitimate, you can be locked in jail criminal offense for panhandling in the state of Indiana. Someone who is homeless and is asking for handouts on the street can be arrested forcibly, handcuffed, taken to jail, locked up. So his mom calls me, and his mom, I explained to her what this entire process is, because she thinks this is absolutely ridiculous. So, why would we ever agree to X, Y, or Z on this? And I had to explain to her, well, this is the law. Like, this is what was voted on. This is what it is. And I remember her telling me, and I apologize to anyone in the audience who's going to think this is getting too political. This is literally just to illustrate a point. I remember her telling me, I have voted for tough on crime policies. I've been a Republican my entire voting life. I've always voted for tough on crime policies, but this is absolutely ridiculous. And in that moment, that's when it occurred to me. That's when it first occurred to me that it doesn't take much for someone to be a defendant. There but for the grace of God go you is kind of the old saying about that. It's like, it does not, when you pass laws expecting them to apply to those people, it doesn't take much for you to become one of those people. So you need defense attorneys there who are going to basically say, okay, these are what the rules are. This is what we agreed on. This isn't being followed. State, you don't get a conviction. That's not trying to get guilty people off. That is literally making sure the rules are followed.
Yeah. Well, Jack, let me ask you then, let's double click into this conversation for a moment. Do tough on crime policies work in your eyes? I mean, I'm sure that's a hot button topic for many defense attorneys, or just the world of, the legal proceedings as a whole. But in your experience as a defense attorney, do those tough on crime policies work?
My personal opinion is that overall, no, they don't work. There's a happy medium somewhere in there. And I know that this point always gets shouted down when it comes to any discussion of crime reform or statutory reform or bail reform. A great example is, I really feel like we shouldn't be using New York City and Los Angeles as great examples of anything, because those two cities themselves have, what is it, something like 20% of the population of the United States in there. First of all, those cities are way too big. That is part of your problem right there. But you hear, like, the whole concept of bail reform about, we're letting these dangerous people back out on the streets, or we need to punish them more harshly. Most crime is overwhelmingly an impulse offense. Someone will, something's not firing in their head. They're not thinking the situation through, and they're just doing something impulsively because they want it right now. Murder's a great example. Like, there's a reason that most states make differentiations between premeditated murder and other murder, like felony murder, where you kill someone in the act of a robbery or something like that. Most people don't think about consequences. If people thought about consequences, they probably wouldn't break the law, because those consequences suck. And because people aren't thinking about the consequences, increasing penalties is not going to make it better. A friend of mine who, I don't think she does this anymore. She used to be a counselor at a high school here, just outside of Indianapolis, so like a career counselor, invited me to speak to her assorted classes during one day. And I had to explain to them, at the time, this is like a good 12, 13 some years ago. At the time, Indiana did not have a dollar threshold for theft offenses. Any theft offense, whether it was, a 50-cent candy bar or a $5,000, diamond bracelet, it was all a felony. And I had to stand there and explain to this classroom full of high schoolers that if you steal a candy bar from the local gas station, you can be charged with a felony and you can be put in prison for up to 3 years. And they had no idea about that. No one ever told them that. And that's the problem. Is like, we don't tell people what these penalties are. And then other penalties make absolutely no sense. When I started my career back in 2006, Indiana's drug laws were so ridiculously out of sync with anything sensible. Our dealing in a narcotic statute basically said that if you were caught with 3 or more grams of a narcotic, you could, and almost always were, charged with dealing in a narcotic, which was a Class A felony. Class A felonies carried potential sentences of anywhere between 20 to 60 years in prison. And that 20 years was a mandatory non-suspendable time period.
Oh, man.
To give you an idea as to how much 3 grams of anything are, if you've ever been to a restaurant or a diner or any place where they give you like sugar packets on the side, each of those sugar packets is basically 1 gram. So 3 sugar packets was enough to put somebody in prison for 20 years.
Man.
For the record, that was longer at the time. That was longer than armed robbery. I have literally had people who killed victims who received, and still receive to this day, less time in prison than dealing drugs.
Wow.
At what point in time does any of this make sense? So the concept of increasing penalties, like, we're not doing anything substantive with it. Now, I don't mean that we should throw the rule book out. I'm not saying that we should just empty the prisons, but you do have to understand that you will need to build more prisons if you want to increase these tough on crime concepts.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That you have to house them somewhere. I meant to look this up before we did the show today, but I think that the current statistic in the United States is something in the area of like a shocking 20% or more of the adult population has some form of criminal conviction. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean like an actual felony, but there's a lot of people who have broken the law.
Sure.
A lot of them don't come back. We do have a lot of clients that we represent once and we never hear from them again. And that's fine. They lived good law-abiding lives. They learned their lesson. That's awesome. Other people didn't. But at the same time, like, what are you going to do? What value is there in constantly increasing penalties without increasing any awareness, without making people know what these things are, giving them alternatives to the difference? I
Well, and
mean,
hence your point. The answer lies somewhere in the middle.
yeah.
When you look at the tough on crime policies. Well, no, this is super interesting. I'm gonna make us turn a left turn again back towards a big question. Well, not really a question, more of kind of a thought from, I would imagine, a lot of clients that you've dealt with, or maybe it's even a misconception out there, and that is this idea of, well, Jack, why can't you get me the same outcome for the guy or gal over there who did the same thing? Why? I don't understand. Why can't you get me that outcome? What say you to this? Misconception is probably putting it lightly.
The line that I actually use quite regularly when I am asked this question is breaking the law is a lot like real estate. It's all about location, location, location. And I'm not really being that facetious with that.
Sure, sure. No, no. Please elaborate.
Our offices are in Indianapolis, Marion County. For those of you who are outside of the state of Indiana watching, Indianapolis is the capital of Indiana. It is almost dead center in the state. That's where our offices are. It is overwhelmingly the largest county in the state of Indiana. It also has the largest number of legal cases for all sorts of obvious reasons. Again, think about Los Angeles and New York City. The more people you have, the more problems you're going to run into. Some other YouTube commentators probably discuss that. I'll defer you to him or her for that. But as a result, it goes back to that discussion we were having a few moments ago about what do you want out of a tough on crime situation. If you want to just basically lock everybody up, you have to pay for it. And that involves building more jails, involving building more prisons, hiring more police officers. All this stuff takes money, and all that money comes from taxes. And as a society, we really don't like paying taxes. We like punishing people. We just don't like paying to punish people. So what happens is in Marion County, there's not space to incarcerate you. There's not space to keep you in the system because there are bigger fish than you to fry. One of the things that I have told people, and this is dead serious, is as far as the state is concerned, you are not worth wasting a bet on. Which basically means like everyone's disappointed with you, everyone's unhappy with you. We just don't have space for you. So we're gonna get you through and hope to God you don't come back and learn your lesson. A lot of the counties that surround Indianapolis, while they are experiencing significant growth, they're holding on to that small town mentality, and they still have the space in their jails to punish people. A good example is under Indiana law, if you have a prior DUI conviction, any subsequent DUI conviction, no matter when it happens, carries with it a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 actual days in the county jail. It doesn't matter if your second DUI is 2 days after your first conviction. It doesn't matter if your second DUI is 20 years after your first conviction. If you pick up a second DUI charge, they will sit on you for at least 5 actual days. And I say at least 5 actual days because the judge has a significant amount of discretion over what those sentences are or are not going to be. In a county that is just to the northeast of us, I'm not going to name names because I am still in the middle of my career and enjoy getting work. There was a judge who their policy and their position was if you picked up a second DUI and you were in that judge's courtroom, you were looking at 270 days incarceration.
Man.
Think about that for a second. Indianapolis, you're basically spending a weekend in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Next county over, you're looking at 270 days of hard punishment. And that's, you'll see
big disparity.
variances. Yeah, it's insane.
It's huge.
Yeah, and you'll see variances like that all over the state. And that's where I get the location concept on it. And we get this, it's interesting. We get this more from people who are incarcerated than people who are out of jail. And I think part of that is if you're in jail, you don't really have a lot to do except for sit and think about your case, talk to other people about their cases and so forth. We've had people who said, hey, my cellie has this, or this guy who just got out of here was charged with the exact same thing with me and he got this. Why can't you get me this? I
Mhm.
have a standing offer for all of my clients. If you can get me the name of whatever defendant that you thought got a better deal with the exact same facts, the exact same facts, um, I will go look that defendant's name up. I will talk to their attorney. I will find out what their plea agreement was. And if I'm wrong and you're right, I'll actually refund you. It's
Yeah.
kind of one of those things like that is how confident I am that there is a difference between the cases.
Sure. Sure, sure. There definitely
And
is.
so far, no one's ever taken me up on that.
Well,
So
good to know. You hear it here now, folks. So if
yeah.
you take it for what it's worth, Jack, I'm gonna kind of bundle my next questions as again, folks, we're diving into true attorney confessions here today with Jack. He's opening up a little bit of the playbook and a peek behind the curtain into his world. Jack, next two questions, I'll kind of bundle them together. How are attorney fees determined or calculated? And then B, my second question to follow up with that is, I would imagine most people think, why is it just so darn expensive these days to hire an attorney to represent them in court? So if you could kind of shed some light on the rate structure, just the way, just the expense surrounding this type of representation. Talk, let me in on a little bit of it here.
There's not really with regards to how attorney fees are determined. Saying it's a crapshoot is probably about the most straight answer I can give to you on that one. Law school itself does not actually teach attorneys how to run a business, which you can make it the ivory tower types wax poetic about the nobility of the law and the majesty of public service and what have you. All of us have to eat. And if you're not working for the government, either as a prosecutor or a public defender, or a deputy attorney general, which is a higher state level prosecutor, you're probably either working for somebody else or you're working for yourself. There's no such thing as a suggested manufacturer's retail price for attorney services. Attorney services go all over creation. To give you an example, when I first started back in 2006, so what is that, 18 years ago now, almost 17 years, however long it is. I've been doing this for a long time. I am getting old. None of this was gray when I started out. When I first started my career, we were doing misdemeanor cases for as low as $750 because no one told me otherwise. Mm-hmm. And there are still attorneys who will do your misdemeanor case for $750. We do not do that anymore. And that doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to do a better job than the $750 attorney. What you're getting is there's the adage about you get what you pay for. And what our office at this stage of our career provides and prides itself on is we provide a white glove concierge style service. We have a policy that if we see it, you see it. Anything that gets filed with the courts, whether it's by us, whether it's by the state, you're going to get that within 24 hours because you need to see what the evidence is. If we receive body camera videos or footage, we give that to you because it's your case, it's your evidence. You need to be able to see that. We have staff members to make sure that calls are always being answered, that you're never talking to an answering machine, that questions are being returned promptly. That is a level of service that is, some people are okay with, some people want that, other people don't, and there's no wrong decision on that. I always tell people, like, whatever decision you make regarding representation is going to be the correct one because you've made it with a full and kind of intentional decision, informed consent. That's what it is. There's a legal word for this, and I feel bad that I didn't recognize it.
Oh, good.
You've made an informed consent decision regarding what you want for your services. Mm-hmm. My experience has been when we are taking cases from people who do hire attorneys on the lower pay scale side of it, the number one frustration and the number one thing that we hear from them by way of frustration is, I could never reach my attorney. My attorney, never seemed to do anything. He was never in, he was never out. It's an opportunity cost.
Yep.
So attorneys will charge whatever they think their area will bear, and what we charge for a DUI here in Indianapolis is very different than what someone in, say, Fayette County would charge for a DUI. Fayette County, to give you a geographical concept, is kind of right over there by the Ohio border. Very, very small county. I think they've got two judges there. At one point in time, they had so few attorneys there, they were actually importing public defenders from other counties. They didn't have enough local attorneys to do the work. That's how small that place is. So again, like it's again going back to the breaking the law things. Like it is still location. There's a different
Sure.
market. Market forces things that pay for all those things.
Mm-hmm.
To
Jack.
bundle that, yeah.
No. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, to kind of transition with that, for why is it so expensive to hire an attorney? I would say that it's not, and the reason that I would say that it's not, and I realize this probably comes across as being a very self-serving concept, is you're hiring a specialist. You're hiring someone who has spent an average of 7 years in college learning a highly technical skill, doing a very demanding and precise job. What we do as trial attorneys, I'm a dying breed. We try more cases on the private side, as far as I'm aware. I could be wrong on this. I don't know. Contrary to popular belief, not all attorneys know each other. There are plenty of attorneys that I don't know, even in this area.
Sure.
To the best of my knowledge, though, from what I've been told from colleagues and other professionals, we do more jury trials in the private sector than most attorneys ever do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're up to, this is March. We've already done one jury this year, and we had 3 other cases that we were ready and raring to go to do jury trials on before the state blinked.
Mm-hmm.
That type of skill is difficult to just basically pick up anybody and say, you have a law license, you can do this. So it's like the surgeon concept. If you get sick, if you're having chest pains, you can go to your doctor, your general primary care physician, and that doctor can probably, through trial and error, figure out what's wrong, give you the right medicine, and you're going to be okay. Or you can go to a cardiologist, a heart specialist, who's going to probably figure out what's happening for you that much more quickly. It's just a different skill set situation. And that's kind of why it appears on the face that from a raw dollar amount, it's expensive to hire an attorney.
Sure. You're paying for the expertise. You're paying for the knowledge.
And I would counter that it's more expensive to not hire an attorney at the end of the day.
That's a good argument. Yeah, that's worth exploring for sure. I mean,
we did a tally at one point in time, and it's on one of the pages on my website. I think it might be under the effects of a conviction. But we found, like, in the state of Indiana alone, I think that we found there was something in the area of 400 plus jobs that you were not allowed to have if you had a criminal conviction on your record. Now, some of those were remarkably archaic jobs. Trust me, once something makes it into the law books, it's never coming off. So, railroad inspector was like one of the jobs that you were disqualified under Indiana law from. Like, you couldn't be licensed as a railroad inspector. We don't have a lot of those anymore. So maybe that one doesn't matter as much. But it is a true fact that if you have a criminal conviction, your earning potential over your life is hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars less. If you have a criminal conviction of any kind, it is increasingly difficult to find an apartment. Apartments, everyone seems to have access to a computer and the ability to try to look anyone up thanks to Google and other type of court website things. We had a person who contacted us. This is years ago at this point in time, but she contacted us because she was accused of a trespassing offense, and we went over everything with her. We explained to her what the cost of services was going to be for us to represent her, what we thought we could do for her. We came up with a payment plan for her. Like, it wasn't one of those things we demand you have to have thousands of dollars up front. Here's the breakdown of what you're looking at. And she made the decision that that was more than she wanted to pay. She wasn't interested in it. She stayed with the public defender. The public defender got her a good outcome. She didn't go to jail. She didn't have any significant penalties. She didn't have like thousands of dollars in probation fees. But what she did have was a criminal conviction. And 6 months after she was convicted, she called asking if I could expunge it because she couldn't find anywhere to live. That one misdemeanor conviction was preventing her from getting her name on a lease at an apartment. That was enough to basically say, we don't want you here. So from that perspective, it was more expensive to not hire an attorney than it was to, go at it alone or go for free. And I'm sure I'm sure at the end of the day, she was fine. I'm sure.
Well, yeah. And not only from a dollar perspective, but also from a time. I mean, it's time consuming to apartment search and go through that application. I mean, that's a time consuming, part of life, but that's a great example to kind of illustrate again, just the cost, not cost barrier, but just the cost conversation surrounding, hiring an attorney, because you're paying for the quality of advice, you're paying for the expertise, and ultimately you're paying for the outcome, and in a lot of instances, a more favorable outcome, shall we say, regardless of what that ultimately looks like based on, the circumstances that you're up against. Jack, as we're kind of rounding out today's conversation, we've covered a lot, a lot of peek behind the curtain into your world. Is there anything else you want the public to know, or just any final thoughts that you want to leave folks with today, if they're, shall we say, considering hiring, a criminal defense or a defense attorney as a whole, or just have any other questions or, ideas or misconceptions, anything at all you want to leave our audience with today?
The number one job of an attorney, outside of all the other stuff that we do, all the stuff that we do in court, all the, all the other shenanigans we get involved in, the number one job that a good attorney knows that they have is answering questions. We will take time to answer your questions. If we can't help you, I will tell you we can't help you. And if I can explain why we can't help you, I will try my best to explain why we can't help you. A lot of times that's usually because it's a type of case that we don't do. For example, our office doesn't handle appellate work. Our office doesn't handle sentence modifications. We will at least answer your general questions and try to point you in the correct direction. If you are thinking of hiring an attorney, we'll work with you. There are economic realities that do come along with that. This is a business. It is a professional corporation. I have multiple people on staff who depend on me for their livelihood. So we can't just take cases for free. And there is a limit to what we can do as far as how much we may or may not be able to reduce fees. But we'll work with you. We will come up with a payment plan. I want you to have a good attorney. I want you to know that you have someone fighting for you. What I don't want you to do is sit there and think, I can't afford an attorney, or I'm not going to bother with this, or it doesn't matter. It does. There is no value in giving up. The only stupid question is the question that you don't ask. Contact our office. Call us. Call any attorney if you don't want to call me. If he's like, well, that guy's a jerk, whatever. Go call someone. Don't just decide, there's nothing I can do. It's all hopeless anyway. Why am I going to waste money? Talk to an attorney, talk to a professional. You wouldn't do your own, if you wouldn't amputate your own hand if you fell down and like stabbed it with something. You'd go to a doctor for an opinion to get it fixed. Same concept. Go to an attorney, get an opinion. If they can't help you, the good ones will tell you. The better ones will work with you to try to find some way to make sure that you can hire an attorney. But that's kind of where we are with that. Don't try to do it alone.
Of course. Well, Jack, I appreciate you and your time. I covered a lot today. And again, folks, to Jack's point, we listed the phone number, email address down there at the bottom of the screen. Make sure you capitalize on that. Reach out to Jack and his team for, to bend their ear or to seek representation should you need it. But Jack, appreciate you and your time. I know you got clients to serve, so let you get back to doing that. But thanks again for jumping on with me today, and I'll see you on the next one.
Anytime.
Of course. And hey, folks, we want to take one final moment here and thank you guys for stopping by and spending time with Jack and I today. If you enjoyed today's episode, kind of a peek behind the curtain and into Jack's world, you learned a thing or two, you come out better for it on the other side. Great. That's what we aim to do. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button then on whichever platform you did check us out on today so that you don't miss out on other great conversations like this. If you're a listener or viewer that came over to the show because of us covering the Richard Allen case, then great. We're really happy to have you here. We're going to cover, as you'll see, if you look back in past episodes, we do cover other cases, just really interesting stuff, whether it be a criminal proceeding case or just general information surrounding, a criminal attorney or criminal defense, the world that is, subscribing to the show is a great way to learn more and, of course, be entertained along the way. But for Jack, I'm Ryan. We're going to go ahead and say so long. But once again, we appreciate you guys stopping by and being with us on Closing Arguments.